Welcome everyone to the Postman for Enterprise webinar. My name is Ken Lane. I'm the Chief Evangelist for Postman. I'm going to talk to you all today about building API first products for your business and the importance of Postman for Enterprise. So before we get started with the technical details, let's talk about the why. Why API first? Why does it matter? As our CEO Abhinav says, every piece of software built today either uses an API or is an API. So it's not a question of whether you should be doing APIs. We're all already doing them. It's a matter of how well you're doing them and how efficiently you're putting your tools and your teams to use. There were three shifts that led to this rise of API first. And the first one really started back in 2007 with the shift from the desktop to the mobile. Once the iPhone came out and the Android device and we had the internet in our pocket, this big shift really began. But as this was progressing, we also started shifting how we built our software. We went from a monolith to a microservices format. And then all of that, starting with the cloud, started moving all of our stuff from the data center into the new cloud environment online, making things more easier to use and more accessible across our teams. And then over the last 5 years, this has really picked up speed, increasing in a growth number of how APIs were used in applications. And here at Postman, we have a unique insight into that growth. And you can see here the number of collections from 2016 on has just been growing exponentially, resulting in what we view as the API economy and around 35 million requests, collections existing across our customers. This API usage exists across many industries and use cases. This is just a small sampling from the API network showing how APIs are being put to use for different business solutions, used for development, financial services, retail and e-commerce, and many other business sectors. All of this has led to an emergence of API first businesses. Amazon is definitely one of the most notable in all of this, but also Twilio and Stripe have emerged as API first businesses that show us all how to do this properly. This all resembles a major shift from what's really considered API last development, where APIs are just an afterthought. Once you've already built your applications, you're deploying APIs for a variety of needs. There's really no strategic thought or plan to how you're building your APIs. And what we wanted to introduce you to is a more API first approach to doing this, highlighting how Amazon, Twilio, Stripe, and others are getting business done each day. So to help illustrate this, we've been working hard on a reference implementation for an e-commerce company that we call Union Fashion. So we're enjoying pulling together this actual business that can demonstrate how API first can work for your enterprise and how you can put Postman to work. So to set the stage, our VP of Engineering, Jeff, he wants to really modernize how we do things, getting ready for Black Friday. So Jeff is looking to be a little bit more efficient on how we get things done, and he's going to bring together the team to start a planning session on how we can move more towards an API first approach. So right now, Jeff, as he's working with his Q&A lead, Susan, and the front end lead, Alex, they all recognize that this is really hard to collaborate. They have many different ways of tracking things, and they're using wikis, they're using docs, they're using emails, they're using GitHub, but really there's no organized way for how we can deliver APIs consistently across the teams. So they've come together and they're pulling together a plan to use Postman to help define this a little bit better. So let's step away from the slide deck here and actually get our hands dirty and look at how we can actually deliver, build, and test using Postman. So the first thing that we need to do to pull together is get our organizational structure a little bit more more in tune. We need to bring together all of our users under one team, and we need to configure that team to best suit what the team's needs are gonna be. We can manage different roles. We can set people up as developers. We can set them up as administrators. And then we can define our team settings in different ways that help make this a lot easier and fit seamlessly with our existing organization. We can choose a single sign-on to help make this a more seamless part of our existing organizational structure and help us quickly manage and set up our team so that we can understand the different activity and how things how the tools are being used. Along the way, we're going to set up different workspaces. We each all have our personal teams, but then we've set up different team workspaces that are meant for a microservices approach to delivering infrastructure. So for purposes of this webinar, we're going to be looking at the Orders API, and we can manage this either on the web or we can manage this within the Postman client. Postman's doing a lot of work to migrate a lot of the features that you're familiar with to the web, but the desktop client is still one place you can find most of the features. So we've set up most of our organization. We've set up our workspaces. We've got our teams organized under one umbrella, where we can then come here to Postman, and we can also set up our schema for our Orders API. So in Postman, the central truth all begins with the central schema using either OpenAPI, RAML, or GraphQL. We've chose OpenAPI 3 for this demonstration. So we've got an OpenAPI 3 here as the central truth. And then we've also synced this OpenAPI definition with GitHub, because our team recognizes that while we will be working here within Postman to do a lot of the work, we'll also be working here in GitHub on this OpenAPI definition, connecting Postman to the rest of our software development lifecycle. So this GitHub sync will allow us to make edits here on GitHub, as well as here in the application, keeping things in sync so that teams can better collaborate and work together. From this central truth, we're able to generate collections, which will then generate these individual requests for each endpoint that we have defined here. Then we can actually make individual requests to that API using Postman as a client. We can then organize ourselves a little bit better by creating environments that define different aspects of our API and the different key value pairs that we're going to need to use to make all of this work. As we're developing our APIs, we're able to also generate mock servers using the collections that we've generated from our OpenAPI definition and keep all of them organized under one umbrella here. So we're able to generate mock servers, we're able to generate documentation, all which can use our environments to get their key value pairs and do what they need to do. As we're defining these contracts, we can work harder to define individual integration and contact trusts that are part of each of these individual API calls. So when we're making a call to an actual API, we can test for different outcomes that we're looking for, and then we can actually see whether we've passed those results. Those are all rolled up in a collection that can then be executed and used by any team member to make sure that the API is doing what it's supposed to do and has the expected outcomes and behaviors. But one of the big problems we've had in collaboration is making sure that there's a feedback loop around these APIs. Of course, we're still emailing and having conversations with team members around what is happening here, but we can also use the built-in comments within Postman to actually engage and have a discussion around each individual API. For the order service, this allows us to centralize all the comments in a single place and be able to have a discussion that's focused around just this API and this service we're trying to deliver. We can also use GitHub issues, which then expose the comments in the feedback loop around the open API definition that we have stored in our GitHub repository, making it seamless for the rest of our API lifecycle. This allows us to build and test our APIs in a new way and definitely be a lot more organized about how we're doing things. But Jeff and the team don't want to just get better in how we design APIs. They also want to get more efficient in how we actually deploy. Biggest problem is we're not actually deploying APIs in a consistent way across teams. So now that we have a central contract and a process for defining how APIs, we have to be able to use this as part of the API lifecycle and actually allow us to deploy new features in a consistent way across teams. So Susan, the Q&A lead, and Kim, the back-end lead, are working on how we can actually deploy APIs. So let's step out of the deck here again and look at how we can do this within Postman. So we have our open API definition, which is synced to GitHub. So now our teams can choose how they're going to take this definition and actually deploy the API. That's going to be part of future presentations where each of the development teams can come back with a proposal for how they're going to take this definition and each version of the API that's synced to GitHub and actually then deploy that as an API. Once that API is deployed, we can keep an eye on that process by actually deploying monitors derived from this collection that we've generated from the open API with all of our tests. We can create new monitors using that existing collection that allow us to apply our environmental variables, run the monitors on different frequencies, and run from different regions, ensuring that each team has deployed the API and it's staying in sync with the central truth of the open API and has the outcomes that we expect, leveraging the environments and all the details that we've set up to keep things in order. We also can deploy mock servers for our production environment. So if we want to have separate mock URLs as well as our live URLs as part of our environment, we can still allow teams to sandbox an API and use it in this way. We can publish documentation so that every team member is on the same page when it comes to what is possible with an API, providing us with simple, easy to use documentation that can be shared and then eventually published when we're ready to go live with the features here. Again, we can use the comments feed here to stay in tune and collaborate. And then we're also using the GitHub issues around the repository for the API to stay in tune with what's happening and keep our teams working together in concert. So all of this allows the team to better work together to design and deploy APIs. But even once we've deployed an API and we've put it into production, we just don't have the visibility and insight into it that we would like to have. So Kim, Susan, and Alex are all working with Jeff to actually understand how Postman can give them more visibility into the product, because they just can't see all of the behavior of the API and what's going on, as well as what the teams are doing behind the scenes when they're working on each of these APIs. So let's go ahead and step out again. Let's take a look at Postman and see how we can make this more efficient and usable. So now we have our documentation. We can actually publish that documentation and make it available for others to use. Whether we want to make it publicly available or privately available, we can choose. We can also publish it with the Run in Postman button and the environments to be able to use the different key value pairs that we've set up. Documentation also gives you scripts in many different languages. So you can choose from Java, all the other common programming languages to be able to interface with this API, giving you access to all the endpoints and ready to go scripts that you can use. So all of this makes the API much more accessible to teams, but we can also make sure that that documentation is always up to date. One of the biggest pain points for developers is that the documentation is actually out of sync with the code and what is happening. So back to Postman, we have our central truth as the open API. As we're managing this, we can make sure that all mock servers, all documentation, as well as all tests are actually validate against that central truth, ensuring that everything is kept up to date. We can run validation on a regular basis. We can view any issues that arise from that, and we can quickly resolve these issues, have team members resolve them, making sure that our API is always up to date and always doing what it should be doing. We can also go back to our monitors. We can view the results of those monitors and see when any problems have arisen, and we can respond to those reports on an individual service basis or across services to understand how things are working, or in this case, how things are not working. Our API was working, then all of a sudden something didn't work properly, and now we've been notified of it, and we can ensure that we're going to meet our service level agreement. We're also given overall team level reports. We're able to tune into what teams have been doing for the last 30 days from different time periods. We can see if they're creating new APIs, what APIs are active, our general team size, as well as we can dive into each individual API and actually understand what's happening with the APIs as it's being used. So now that we have our API published and available for use, we can actually go to market. So we've got an API that we know the documentation is up to date. It has the production environments. We have all the tests. We're observing and we're monitoring it. Now we're ready to go to market. So we're going to go ahead and publish it as part of our newsletter, making sure teams are aware that this new API exists. We're going to publish it to social media because this is a public API and we definitely want to get the word out about it. And then we're going to publish it to our blog and make sure it's available on the blog, making sure that there's lots of communication around this API, augmenting that existing feedback loop, encouraging people to give feedback and submit issues, as well as team members can continue commenting on each individual API, allowing us to gather feedback for when we're ready to start developing the next version. At the end, we can actually kick off our new version, take all of our feedback, and actually begin iterating upon our design and making it ready for the next team that's going to come along and do the work. So all of that allows us to go to market and then have a strategy for how we're going to communicate and collaborate around the design of our APIs. So all of this is going to allow our Union Fashion team to meet its Black Friday goals, making Jeff, the VP of Engineering, very happy, allowing them to be much more efficient in how they deliver their orders API, as well as enhance their products and other APIs that they're needing to be successful on this day. So all of this is possible because of Postman API Platform. All of these features and components coming together to work in concert to help Union Fashion achieve its goals. All of this starts with what most developers understand is the Postman client, the desktop client, allowing you to define your individual APIs, save them as collections, and put them to use on a daily basis. But this also involves using the CLI and running those same collections as part of a pipeline or at the command line level. And then, of course, you can use the Postman API to further automate and integrate, making this functionality seamless, doing what you do in the desktop within your existing applications. And then we have a whole host of integrations, as well as you can choose from the API network to find other APIs amongst our partners. So this really takes advantage of the core runtime services for Postman, allowing you to authorize and define your requests, organize them as collections, make sure that they have robust examples, and then they have rich environments for managing the build as well as the production and other environments, making sure that you have the key value pairs that you need to get things done. It allows you to efficiently manage your users, organize them into teams, and craft workspaces that fit with your API development lifecycle, allowing you to organize those teams, establish feedback loops, and version control all of your APIs as you see fit. Postman Enterprise gives you role-based access control, including SSO and the audit logs that you're going to need to have visibility into what's going on. Then once you have all of your core enterprise capabilities defined as collections, you can monitor those, you can mock those, you can define them as tests, allowing you to derive those all from that central Open API, RAML, or GraphQL schema, and then it gives you visibility into that life cycle through history, making those APIs much more tangible with your documentation, which all allows you to orchestrate things in a much more organized way across teams. The Postman API platform allows you to move from that API last development to an API first development process. It gives you all of the features that you need to be able to not make your API infrastructure an afterthought, but make it something that's actually carefully planned and organized across teams and meeting your business needs before you ever actually start writing code. And then once you're ready, you can actually begin to develop and shape those APIs, move them into production, and test and make sure that they're doing what they should be doing. This is something that over 500,000 organizations are doing with Postman right now. All of these companies are trying to move from to an API first way of doing things, allowing them to be more efficient in how they're developing APIs, delivering web, mobile, and other applications on top of their infrastructure. All of this has allowed for some pretty phenomenal growth when it comes to how Postman is used. We're pretty excited to see how the number of users grow over the last couple of years, reaching 200,000 in 2016, or 2 million, in 2016, which is pretty phenomenal. But we're pretty excited here in 2020 that we've crossed the 10 million threshold with users, actually reaching new heights that we never thought was possible. But when you have this many features that actually make developers' lives easier, it's to be expected that you'll see this kind of growth. So when it comes to putting Postman to use, one of the reasons that we're so beloved by developers is all of the features are available across all pricing tiers. But we have tailored the product to meet the needs of our business and enterprise users, which is mostly based upon growth. But then when it comes to the growth and the overall usage of the APIs and the tools, but when it comes to the enterprise tier, you can also take advantage of some of the enterprise features like SSO, enhanced role-based authentication, and the audit and reporting that gives you more visibility and observability into your platform. So we're happy to answer any questions you have about the enterprise tier and how these features can actually be put to use as part of your enterprise operations. So we encourage you, head over to the Postman community.postman. You can join in the conversation and have your questions answered there and have discussions with the rest of our team. Definitely encourage you to browse and join the API network, explore some of the APIs that have been published and are publicly available there. And then, of course, we do everything on GitHub. So you can engage with us on GitHub. Just as we showed you with Union Fashion, you're able to actually make your APIs more accessible and usable there. And that's it. We've got a post-webinar survey that you can participate in and answer some more of your questions here. Let's go into a Q&A. I got done a little bit early, but looks like I kind of sped through things, but happy to have some more conversations and talk about what we can do. So it looks like Postman does not have free tier support with GitLab. That is correct. We are testing things out and making sure things work with GitHub, and then we're going to be extending that to GitLab and Bitbucket, because that just makes sense. Working my way through the questions here. Got another one. Does Postman integrate with Swagger? So yes, we do. We integrate with Swagger 1.2 as well as Swagger 2.0, but everything's moving towards Open API 3.0. So if you aren't familiar with the evolution of the Swagger specification, Swagger has been deprecated at version 2.0, and it was reborn as Open API specification, which is the current version of the spec. So we support all three, but we recommend you look at Open API 3 when it comes to actually making things, using it as a central truth for your APIs. All right, let's see what else we got. How does performance testing work, and does it do volume testing? So you can do performance testing with Postman right now. You can define collections that use the test scripts to actually make certain calls to APIs and look for the performance and how quickly an API responded. You can roll those collections up and you can run those from multiple regions. So you get a lot of the basic characteristics of performance testing alongside the other type of testing that you're going to do. So it's not a full-blown load testing engine like you would see from other more industrial grade, but it does give you a lot of the features you're going to need. Let's look here. So how to export a collection into Open API 3 format. So there is no way to export a collection into an Open API 3 format. So if you have an API defined in your using the Postman API builder, you can sync that definition with GitHub, which gets it out of the system. But currently there is no way to export a collection into Open API 3 format. We recommend really starting with that truth as your Open API 3, using API Builder and using the sync to keep it all in order and working together. Can Postman have a common verification method shared by all tests? So where you store your tests and how you organize them, because you can define tests for each collection at the collection level, at the folder, and at the request level. So how you define your tests and what scope you apply them at is up to you and will depend on the types of APIs that you're working with. Any news on Azure DevOps integration? Not at the moment, but we are still working on defining how Postman can be used along with Newman, the collection runner, as part of the Azure DevOps process. So if you want to start a thread in the community, happy to chime in and share some of what we're working on when it comes to that. Oh, lots of good questions. Can documentation be fully branded? Not yet. We're still working on, there's some new documentation enhancements coming, but right now it's up to you to link and integrate documentation that you publish with whatever portal you're actually using as part of your developer experience. Wow, we just keep going all day here on tests. I'm glad I kind of ended a little early for these questions. These are good. Will there be a practical way to reuse test steps and requests? So again, this depends on how you define your collections and organize your tests. But yes, we are looking at ways of how we can make test management more modular, more reusable, more composable, so that you can centrally organize tests and then reuse them across different collections. Right now, you definitely have to carefully think about how you're going to craft your collections to make those as usable as possible. But there will be more features coming that will help you be a little bit more organized about that. Do you plan on adding logging of requests to the mock server? Yes, we are currently doing a significant amount of work when it comes to standardizing the logging and activity and reporting around every Postman object and resource. So when it comes to workspaces, when it comes to collections, when it comes to environments, and when it comes to mocking, we will be working to give more visibility into what is happening there. Speak a little bit about Newman. Well, Newman is our open source runner that you can take any collection and bake it into your existing pipeline and run it as part of your infrastructure. So if you're not familiar, Postman, the collection itself, the JSON format that is a collection format, is open source. Newman is an open source runner for those collections, which opens up a whole world of possibility when it comes to taking what you've defined within Postman and running it seamlessly as part of your infrastructure. So if you haven't played with Postman more, definitely recommend kicking the tires and seeing what it's all about. There's a lot of potential and functionality available in there. Does Postman support integration with API gateways like Apogee? Yes, if your API gateway or any of your API infrastructure has APIs, Postman can work with it. So you can find collections there are Postman collections out there for Apogee infrastructure. There's also open API definitions for Apogee infrastructure. You can import that, and then you can define collections that orchestrate and work with your API gateway, allowing you to automate or manually run collections that do different things with the management of your APIs. But if you're interested in learning more about this, feel free to head over to our community and start a thread, and we'll tune in and we'll share some of the work we're doing with different API gateway providers, helping you understand what else is happening and coming down the pipes when it comes to API gateways and management. When you clone the version to a new one, the only carried forward one group of items. Why? Well, there's many different ways that you can clone. If you're not using the forking and merging capabilities of collections, you're probably hitting a lot more friction than you need to when it comes to actually what gets carried forward and what can be merged back in. Oh, looks like someone's diving into that question. I'll back off that one. Looks like one of our team members diving in. I don't understand quite right how to sync the JSON formatted API to the Git repo. So when you're working with an API builder, there's a connect to repository button at the top that will walk you through everything you need to do to be able to actually sync that individual API with a specific repo and a specific file in that repository. So you actually have to connect it to a specific version of your API in Postman, but then it allows that sync to occur between API Builder and your GitHub repo. Is there going to be API schema validation feature added? Tell me when a key doesn't exist, doesn't match. So we are looking at different ways that we can enhance the validation of schema. So this goes beyond what's already in there right now. You can validate your collections against your schema, making sure your documentation, your mocks, and other things are in alignment. But there is no validation for the schema itself against a set of rules. But you can build Postman collections to do this. So you can test not just collections and the outcomes of individual API calls. You can use the Postman API to pull an open API schema and actually use test scripts to validate that endpoints meet certain requirements. This is all early stage stuff, proof of concepts, but there are so many ways you can use Postman collections to validate not just the API, but also the open API schema, allowing you to do more work there. Is there a method for tagging tests or better organizing the execution of tests according to a tag, not just collection? Right now, no. We are evaluating tags. There are several discussions going on across GitHub issues around how tags can be used. And if you're familiar with Open API, tags are used commonly as part of applying it to individual API paths and requests. And so we're looking at how these tags can be used for better organized, not just individual endpoints and requests and responses, but also some of the other resources like mocks and tests. So right now there is no way, but I do recommend that you look at the Postman API that gives you access to your collections, and you can use that API to help you better organize, pull your tests and organize them across collections. Man, you guys just keep coming with some great questions here. Can I create endpoints similar to Hookbin where I can generate a unique URL and view packages sent to it? No. One of the challenges with Postman right now is it's a desktop client. So deep linking into the desktop client isn't possible. But we are looking at, you got a little taste of some of the capabilities of Postman that the features in the desktop client are now available on the web, which then allows you to link into mocks, docs, activity, logs, reports, and different aspects of how Postman can be used, but not the actual request structure yet. So stay tuned for more. If you've been attending the Postman Galaxy Tour, then you've seen a little teaser that we're moving things to the web. And then this will allow you to generate more unique URLs that deep link into specific steps within a collection, specific requests, and aspects of how APIs work. Let me find some more questions here. Is there a trick to making private GitHub repos visible to the GitHub sync feature? So as far as I know, there is no limitation for private repos. It's all based upon what your OAuth token has access to, your personal access token. If it has access to a repository, you should be able to sync to it. I could be wrong on that, but I will double check and start a thread in the community to have that discussion. Are there any open API specs, scaffolding tools to be able to generate a web API controllers in .NET from the API documentation created in Postman? Well, I would say yes, there's quite a few open API tools out there for generating web controllers and a variety of different languages. I would step back and say you don't want to generate them from the API documentation. You want to generate them from the open API truth. So no, Postman doesn't have a default feature for you to do this, but this is a good example of why we stay synced with your GitHub repo. That open API truth in your GitHub repo can then be used in conjunction with other open source tools to make things happen as part of the API lifecycle and automate the generation of server or client-side code and other things that you're going to need. So I recommend looking at sites like Open API Tools. There's several places that you can find open source tooling that'll help you do that. How to automate test cases in Postman? Well, it depends on the type of automation you're needing. So the first step is get your collection defined, have your tests in there, and be able to manually run that. Once your collection is as robust as it possibly can, has all of your tests, and has the reporting that you're looking to test, then how you automate that is up to you. You can automate as a monitor, as I showed you as part of the union fashion. You can take that collection and you can run that as a monitor in different regions, and it'll run. You can choose which steps as part of that collection you want to run. So you can run it in different regions on the schedule that you choose, or you can use that that collection and run it as part of your pipeline using Newman. And that's what I referenced before in an earlier question, is that you can take that collection that's open source, that Newman runner that's open source, and you can bake that into any infrastructure you want. So really that opens up any possibilities when it comes to automating tests and how you put those collections to work. Does Postman have a roadmap for offering certifications for developers or architects? Nothing to report right now, but that is a pretty interesting one. I recommend starting a thread over in the community, and then we can listen and see what we can do about that. Because I think acknowledging that some people within our community have the skills is a pretty important thing. All right, we got more questions. Man, you guys will just keep going, huh? I'm going to answer a few more. Just go another minute or two here, and then we're going to call it quits. Is there a way to set up a monitor on an on-prem firewall test instance? No. Right now, monitors only run in the cloud, and it has to have access to an API via URL. So unfortunately, there's no on-prem options right now. But there are ways that we can meet compliance with your teams to allow you to operate in the cloud more securely and confidently. Do you plan to offer some simple online non-SQL database backend for the API solutions? So this is one way that watching how developers are using Postman is how environments get used. I think I gave a quick glimpse in storing basic key value pairs in an environment, but some of our power users are using environments as a simple key value store and actually storing different values, allowing them to connect different APIs together and put those to use, and then reference that environment as part of across teams and as part of automation. So look at environments and try to think of it a little bit differently than just putting keys or your base URL in there, and actually looking at how you can store data in there. And we're keeping an eye on how people are using it. But if you have specific storage needs that you would like to see, definitely submit a thread on the community, because we'd love to hear from you and how we can evolve environments more towards meeting people's storage needs. All right, let me do one more, and then we're going to call it quits here. Let's see. The Union Fashion Orders README requires access to navigate links. How do we get access? Stay tuned. You can, all of the Union Fashion evolution is publicly available on GitHub, but the workspaces and some of the other collections and aspects are still stored within a specific team. So you have to have access. Once we build out a little functionality, we're going to explore how we can make more of this available to customers. So stay tuned. Union Fashion is going to be our default reference implementation, and we're going to keep building out the company. As an API first company, we're actually going to build the website, build all the APIs, evolve the mobile app, and actually start selling some merchandise through it, so that we can have actual real world end-to-end implementations on how all of this works and how Postman can be used within an API first approach. So stay tuned. You can go ahead, and that's one of the reasons why we did this on GitHub. You can follow it and you can tune into the updates there. And once we have more access available, we'll go ahead and publish there. And I think that's a pretty good note to end on. I think I'll go ahead and close it up there. I want to thank everyone for joining today for our enterprise webinar. If you have any more questions, head over to the community. Make sure and fill out the survey. We'd love to hear from you and understand more about what you would like to see from Postman. Thank you.